So if you're someone who's driven, I mean, really driven, by that ambition to make a lasting difference in the world,
Mm-hmm.
if you're one of those, special people trying to launch, or maybe you're already running a small nonprofit, then you get it. The sheer overwhelming scope of the
Oh,
challenge.
you really do. It's an exhausting mandate.
Right. You're not just passionate, you're suddenly the CEO, the CFO, the
Wow.
HR director.
And the primary service provider,
Yeah.
all at once. Startup founders they're unique, but that initial fire often runs straight into a brick wall
Mm.
of just operational reality.
Oh, huge brick wall.
Yeah, they're operating without the deep infrastructure or, the institutional memory that bigger organizations have. They're forced to learn everything on the fly.
And that learning curve is exactly what we're diving into today. Our mission here is to really analyze that incontrovertible link between a founder's knowledge, whether it's formal or just lived experience,
Yeah.
and the actual sustainable success of their organization.
We're moving beyond just passion. We're talking about implementation,
Yeah.
maintenance,
Yeah.
the long term.
Exactly.
We've synthesized a lot of expert insights on why knowledge is the true foundation, what specific areas are, well, non-negotiable for success, and the common, often destructive pitfalls that founders have to deal with.
And for you listening right now, if you need to jumpstart that education immediately, we want to point you straight to the resource that really underpins this whole deep dive. For educational videos and so much more on small and startup nonprofits, just visit smallnonprofitcourses.com.
Knowledge is power in this sector.
It really is. We want to make sure you have it. Okay, so let's unpack this core argument. Why is education the insurance policy for lasting impact? It seems obvious, but it's deeper than that, right?
It's so much deeper. I mean, think of it this way. A passionate but unprepared founder is kind of like an engineer who wants to build a bridge but has zero understanding of structural mechanics.
Or the permitting regulations.
Exactly. The intention is noble, but the whole structure is probably going to fail.
So that makes the need for knowledge kind of dual-sided. That's what the sources explain. First, you have to be a genuine expert in the mission field itself.
Right, the actual cause.
Hmm?
If you're opening a food pantry, goodwill is great, but you need to understand supply chains, eligibility rules, where the real community gaps are.
That's the strategic insight piece. The sources show that founders who, skip that deep research often just end up replicating services that already exist.
Or they just address symptoms, not the root causes,
Hmm.
which is such a waste of precious early capital. True strategy means knowing which specific gaps aren't being filled yet.
But then there's the flip side. And this, I think, is where we see the most spectacular failures. It's the second area, mastering the sector and regulation.
Oh, this is the essential stuff, the tedious stuff.
Yeah, legal compliance, governance, financial reporting. It's the scaffolding.
It is the scaffolding that holds the whole mission up. You can have brilliant field knowledge, but if you fail to understand nonprofit regulations, maintaining your 501c status, you're exposing the organization to legal issues, financial penalties. It's not a suggestion, it's the barrier to entry.
And it's so personal, too. The sources say the nature and culture of a small nonprofit, it just inevitably expresses the founder's own strengths and weaknesses.
It's a mirror of the founder.
Totally. So education is your chance to, remediate what you don't do well. If you, the founder, you just despise financial tracking.
Which many do.
Right. You need education not to become an accountant, but to manage that weakness strategically, to know how and when to delegate it properly.
It turns a weakness into a strategic consideration instead of an accidental failing. And that creates a powerful strategic edge.
And that leads right to the trust factor. Trust is the currency of the nonprofit world.
It is.
And it's built on perceived competence. A quality education, even if it's just a certificate or some specific online courses, gives you undeniable confidence. And that confidence, in turn, helps build the trust of donors, grant makers, everyone.
Exactly. When a potential grant funder looks at a new organization, they're not just looking at the mission statement. They are assessing risk.
They want proof you know what you're doing.
They want proof that leadership understands fiduciary duty, reporting requirements, long-term sustainability. If a founder seems unsure about basic operations, that risk assessment immediately goes way up. Education lowers that risk.
Okay, so if education is the insurance policy, what are the core coverage areas? The sources really stress that a founder's education is never, ever complete.
Absolutely not. The landscape is constantly shifting. The moment you stop learning, you risk becoming obsolete, especially with legal compliance. You have to always be seeking out new seminars, workshops, and this is critical. building personal relationships with other experts,
Lawyers, accountants.
seasoned nonprofit pros, people who can add knowledge and depth.
So let's move from that mandate to the specific curriculum. The source material identifies 4 essential areas. We're calling them the 4 pillars that founders just have to master.
This is the bedrock of competence. Let's start with the operational engine, the lifeblood. Number 1 is fundraising.
And this is more than just asking for money.
So much more. It's everything from diversifying revenue, individual donors, corporate sponsors, grants, to understanding donor stewardship and retention.
That's often the most overwhelming part for new founders. It feels like this constant high-stakes cycle. So if fundraising is the lifeblood, number 2 is, what, the central nervous system, board management.
Yes, and it's so critical even for a tiny organization that might only have 3 people on the board.
Why is that?
Because the board represents governance and oversight. It's what moves the organization beyond just being about the founder. Mastering board management means understanding fiduciary duty, that legal obligation to act in the organization's best interest.
And ensuring you maintain an independent voting majority.
Yes, that's crucial. Without a functioning independent board, getting major grants or showing you're stable for the long term becomes almost impossible.
That's a huge technical distinction, the difference between a rubber stamp group and a real governing board. Okay, pillar 3, financial management.
And this is where most of the compliance issues start.
I believe it.
It involves budgeting, internal controls, transparency, reporting. For a founder, this means knowing how to read the monthly financials, understanding the difference between unrestricted and restricted funds, and preparing for that annual Form 990 filing.
Which is public record. And finally, number 4, the barrier that keeps the whole thing legal. Legal compliance. This is always changing, isn't it?
It's dynamic, and like we said, ignorance is no defense. This covers everything from maintaining tax-exempt status to proper state registration if you solicit funds, to employment laws if you hire staff.
So fundraising, board management, financial management, and legal compliance.
Those 4 pillars stabilize the entire organizational structure. They show you're ready for growth.
And for founders who want that sort of formal stamp of approval, the sources highlight this growing trend of certificates in nonprofit management.
Yes, they're increasingly seen as verifiable technical proof that a founder gets these pillars and is operating with real intent.
So all this knowledge, it empowers a founder to move past the initial idea, the dreaming phase.
And into the practical reality of implementation and maintenance. It's that direct link between having a good idea and actually creating a structure that can survive and scale that good idea.
Okay, speaking of structure, let's get into the weeds. Let's talk about the practical realities, the big operational challenges founders face.
Yeah, let's use some specific training examples cited in the sources. These course titles are basically a checklist of common painful struggles.
Okay, let's start with one that's fundamental. The founder's personal relationship with the organization's money. It gets blurry.
It gets very blurry. You see these critical training topics pop up like, can nonprofit founders take a salary? And when to start paying yourself?
It's just fascinating that those are even questions, but it really highlights that self-sacrificial mindset, doesn't it? Founders feel guilty taking a fair wage.
Or they operate under this dangerous idea that self-funding is a virtue. It's a recognized and dangerous trap, which leads to the next critical training step.
Which is?
Stop paying for your nonprofit out of your pockets. This isn't just about your personal finances. It is about organizational longevity.
Because if the nonprofit relies on your savings,
it's not a sustainable entity. It's a glorified hobby waiting to fail the minute your funds run dry. Yeah. That transition to sustainable revenue is just monumental.
And that transition is incredibly taxing, which brings us to the operational realities. Most small nonprofits, they start as a team of 1.
Maybe 2 volunteers, if you're lucky.
So learning how to grow your nonprofit when you're a team of 1 is fundamental. It means learning how to delegate, how to automate.
And that operational burden takes a massive human toll. The forces point to necessary guidance on, tips to having a healthy work-life balance when starting a new nonprofit.
You can't sustain the mission if you burn yourself out in the first 2 years. That's a loss for everyone.
And let's be real, not every founder quit their day job right away. Many are bootstrapping this thing in their off hours.
So the question, can you work a full-time job while building your side business, is a really practical consideration.
A huge one. It requires specific logistical and legal planning to avoid conflicts of interest.
So those questions are about just surviving the immediate reality, but the biggest long-term challenges, they really involve the founder's relationship with their own leadership role.
Yes, founders have to understand the specific behavioral patterns that can threaten their own organization, even if they come from a place of deep passion.
Which leads directly to that recognized toxic leadership pitfall, nonprofit founder syndrome.
Hmm.
Is it affecting your nonprofit? This is where a founder, having poured their heart and soul into this thing, just refuses to delegate or let go of control.
They see the organization as an extension of themselves.
Yeah.
And that syndrome stifles growth in two huge ways. First, no talent will stay if they can't actually lead or make decisions.
Of course not.
And second, major grantors are very suspicious of nonprofits, where all decision-making is centralized around one person. It just screams poor governance and high risk.
So you have to learn to build systems to share authority.
Exactly, to ensure the organization can mature.
And dealing with founder syndrome is part of taking the long view. Another thing founders often overlook is the need for planning your exit strategy, no matter how new the organization is.
An exit strategy isn't about retiring tomorrow. It's about preparedness. It's about having succession plans in place for the board, for the staff.
Making sure the mission is protected if you, I don't know, get hit by a bus.
Right, or just want to take a sabbatical. If the organization can't survive without you, it hasn't actually matured.
And this whole framework is captured perfectly by a concept from the sources, the nonprofit founder's life cycle, from startup to stepping aside.
It acknowledges that the founder's role has to evolve. It eventually must transition for the organization to fully mature and survive for decades, not just a few years.
Which requires foresight and deliberate education.
So, to synthesize all this, the evidence is really clear. Educated nonprofit leaders aren't just great dreamers. They are geared toward implementation, accountability, and maintenance.
They create organizations that can actually sustain their mission and solve the problems they set out to solve.
And if the regulatory landscape and everything else is always changing, it means your education is never really done. There is always a gap to fill.
Always a new skill to acquire to fortify your structure.
Which brings up the ultimate strategic question for you, the listener, to think about.
Yeah.
Given this ever-changing landscape, what is the single most urgent piece of new knowledge? Is it a deep dive on board oversight, a new fundraising technique, or finally structuring that exit strategy? What do you need to acquire right now to fortify your nonprofit?
That is the essential education mandate. And remember, if you need comprehensive educational resources on any of these topics, from mastering the 4 pillars and handling founder syndrome to planning that transition, we have the resource for you. Visit smallnonprofitcourses.com for educational videos and more on small and startup nonprofits.